Time sure flew quickly. Eugene suddenly had this thought as he looked in the mirror during the early hours of one morning. He casually tidied up his shaggy mop of hair as he stared at his own face in the mirror. He was now 17 years old. 4 years had already passed since the end of the bloodline continuation ceremony and his adoption into the main family. Although his face still looked like that of a young boy's, his body was almost fully grown. As Eugene examined his own wide chest and broad shoulders, for a moment he was overcome by his emotions. This really is a great body. This was a topic that he had thought of several times over the 17 years he had lived in this body, but he never got bored of repeating this fact within his head whenever it came up. First of all, he had a handsome face. Eugene wasn't just saying that because it was his. Even if he was forced to look at it objectively, he would have to admit that his features were good-looking. Although he felt that Hamel's face from his past life wasn't all that ugly, comparing that face to his current face after being reincarnated as Eugene, the difference in their looks was about as much as the difference between an ordinary elf's and a human's. Though not as much as an elf compared to an orc. Eugene had no desire to disparage the face of his previous life to that extent. After patting his smooth cheeks a few times, Eugene started stretching his facial muscles by pulling all sorts of expressions in the mirror. The nasty look in his eyes when he frowned hadn't changed at all since childhood. It was just a part of his innate character. Despite going around with narrowed eyes ever since he was young, Eugene was just glad that he didn't have any wrinkles. I had an even nastier look in my eyes during my previous life. Relaxing his frown, he gave a broad smile instead. But was this handsome guy in the mirror really him? Although he had already graduated from truly thinking such nonsensical thoughts, even after 17 years of living in this body, he still felt amazed each time he saw this handsome face in the mirror. I have to admit it, your blood is strong, Eugene thought as he raised his eyes to his gray hair. The older he grew, the more prominent the gray hairs became. Every time Eugene saw this hair color, he was reminded of Vermouth. Eugene had his reasons for indulging in such self-absorbed sentiments this early in the morning. After initiating his mana when he was 13, Eugene had trained his mana every morning without skipping a single day. And today, Eugene had finally reached the 3rd star in the White Flame formula. That was quick. He could feel the split-off cores circling around his heart. 3 points of light that showed he had reached the 3rd star of the White Flame formula. Way too quick. After he had started to train his mana, Eugene had realized something. The White Flame formula's performance was incomparable to the mana training scripture he had learned in his previous life. Eugene was able to extract the optimal degree of efficiency from just a small amount of mana, and the speed with which he absorbed mana was also extremely fast. The cost of spreading this absorbed mana throughout his body and turning it into strength was also not very high. However, for him to have achieved this rank so quickly, it couldn't just be attributed to the superiority of the White Flame formula. It was also because Eugene's body was naturally attuned to absorbing mana. Although it's great that this body's performance is so amazing, sometimes he couldn't help but feel perturbed. If it's already this fast, just how much faster will my progress be later? It would be the opposite of subtle. But this was actually quite a pleasant issue to be perturbed about. Eugene smiled as he looked at his reflection. But the strength I had in my previous life won't be enough. This amazing body had been granted to him, Eugene Lionheart, and it had given him a lot of expectations for his future. With this body, he couldn't be satisfied with just relying on the memories and experiences of his past life. Eugene had become convinced of this fact years ago. Hamel had definitely been a great talent. Although he wasn't as good as Vermouth, he had also known how to wield all sorts of weapons. Without any formal training, Hamel's skills had been forged and honed on the battlefield as he towed the line between life and death. This meant his techniques had been refined through constant usage. Hamel had made a name for himself with just these skills and had even come to mistake himself as a genius. It was at this point that he had met Vermouth, and Hamel had suddenly realized that he wasn't a genius after all. After becoming Vermouth's companion, he had also gone through a lot. His techniques had been further polished, and he'd added even more skills to his repertoire. But it's still not enough. It wasn't enough to just acquire the strength he had in his previous life. To take advantage of this talented and greed-provoking body of his, he needed more than just his past life's memories. I need to learn everything, and not just to a basic level either. The sword, the spear, the axe, and the bow. He already knew how to skillfully handle most weapons. He had confidence in his weapon techniques since he had refined these skills in order to not just survive but thrive in the devildom. But he wasn't quite there yet. Although he was still a little slower than he had been in his previous life, he knew in his head how to get there. It was just a matter of when, not if. His body would catch up to what he knew it was capable of. So if he would eventually get there anyway, wouldn't it be more efficient to use his time elsewhere? Looks like I need to learn some magic, Eugene suddenly spouted. What kind of bullshit is that? Cyan gasped. As Cyan sat on the ground, trying to catch his breath, he lifted his head to look up at Eugene. The monstrous guy standing beside him wasn't showing any signs of exertion, even after all the exercise they had just done. At first, this would have made him flare up in envy, but now, after 4 years of looking at that relaxed expression, he was already used to it. I said that I need to learn some magic, Eugene kindly repeated. And I said, what kind of bullshit is that? Cyan spat out with a confused expression on his face. Eugene wasn't the only one whose body had grown during these 4 years. Cyan had also grown a lot. Of course, it was obvious that Cyan didn't really appreciate this fact, and Eugene was a big reason for that. Although they might be of similar age, Cyan was just a tiny bit shorter than Eugene, and the difference in their skill levels was just as great as ever. Speaking of this morning, Eugene continued speaking without offering Cyan a hand up. Cyan was still a brat with too much self-respect. He wouldn't admit he had lost even when he was defeated, and he wouldn't appreciate it if Eugene offered him a hand up. Even though Cyan would no longer fuss about being insulted or whatnot, like what had happened when they first met, it would only stoke feelings of frustration lingering within the comers of his heart if Eugene were to show him any kindness. I was just training in the white flame formula like I usually do. Could it be? Did you really? Cyan couldn't finish the question. Cyan's eyes started trembling as he got a bad feeling. Gritting his teeth, he jumped to his feet. Eugene smiled as he saw Cyan getting flustered like this. And then this happened. As Eugene finished speaking, the mana that was usually spread throughout his body gathered near his heart. Once there, the 3 stars at his core began to resonate with each other. These stars, locked together in a circuit around his heart, began to explosively amplify the power of his mana. Fwash! Mana, in the form of pure white light, engulfed Eugene's entire body. Cyan stared at this sight with wide eyes. The white flame-like light wrapped around Eugene's form looked like a flowing lion's mane. What the fuck? Cyan swore, his voice shaking. Since he also practiced the white flame formula, he was well aware of what that mana cloak engulfing Eugene signified. By covering his body in a blaze of mana like that, he had truly created a fiery beacon that honored the name of the white flame formula. This meant that Eugene had reached the 3rd star of the white flame formula. Is that even possible? Cyan asked in disbelief. Cyan was so ashamed that he felt like he would be better off dead. He had initiated his mana 7 years earlier than Eugene and had been training in the white flame formula for nearly as long. Thanks to this, he had managed to reach the 2nd star of the white flame formula 3 years ago. But until now, Cyan's progress had remained stalled at the 2nd star. The stars around his heart seemed like they were just about to divide, but they never did. But instead, that annoying son of a bitch, Eugene, who had initiated his mana 7 years later than Cyan, had already reached the 3rd star of the white flame formula. Of course, it's possible, Eugene said with a relaxed smile as he allowed the mana to dissipate. Because I'm a genius. Eugene thought declaring something like that from your own mouth was rather shameful. Or at least, he used to think that. But now, he had to admit that it would be ridiculous to pointlessly act humble. He had been born with the body of a genius, and on top of that, he had memories of his past life. Although Hamel from his past life wasn't a genius, Eugene definitely was. Why don't you just go and die? Cyan cursed. Eugene chided him. Brothers shouldn't say such things to each other. Like you can talk about what brothers shouldn't do. Every morning you beat me up so badly that it feels like I'm going to croak. Aren't you the one who keeps asking for a spar every morning? If you don't want to get beaten up, let's just stop. It doesn't matter to me. 2. Cyan ground his teeth as he glared at Eugene. Challenging Eugene to a spar every morning was Cyan's own way of dealing with the frustration of his rivalry with Eugene. Honestly speaking, Eugene appreciated this change in Cyan's attitude. At first, he thought that Cyan was just a stupid brat, but perhaps because he had come to accept Eugene after the adoption, Cyan's foolish streak had shown a lot of improvement. But why magic of all things? Cyan returned to the main point. Because I've never learned any magic, Eugene explained. So that's why you want to learn magic? Don't make me laugh. And how exactly do you intend to learn magic? Do you want to call up a teacher from the capital? I'll need to check with the patriarch regarding that. Are you really serious? No, but why on earth do you want to learn magic all of a sudden? Cyan just couldn't understand Eugene. Since he had that much talent in martial arts, why would he want to dabble in magic instead of focusing on what he was good at? Cyan tried to dissuade Eugene. Aren't you too old to be learning magic? 17 is still plenty young, denied Eugene. This is nonsense. Have you forgotten about what happened to Eward? Cyan asked with a snort as he dusted off his pants. He went off to learn magic when he was 15, 2 years younger than you are now, and now he's just being treated like a fool in Aroth. 7. Eugene glared at Cyan and growled. Bastard, how dare you say such a thing about your older brother? Did I say anything that wasn't true? Cyan protested while shrugging off Eugene's glare. Instead of putting on airs and pointlessly heading to Aroth to learn magic, just stay here at the main estate, where it's comfortable. If you really do tell him that you want to start learning magic, Father might just start crying tears of blood. That did seem to be a possibility. 4 years ago, Eward Lionheart, the eldest son of the main family, had accompanied Lovelian, the head wizard of the Red Tower, to Aroth as soon as the bloodline continuation ceremony was over. But in the end, he couldn't become Lovelian's disciple. It seemed that his potential wasn't bad, as he had been allowed to remain in Aroth, but he couldn't become as big of a success as his parents had hoped for. Now 4 years had passed, and Eward was still staying in Aroth. According to what Eugene had picked up in passing, he was currently learning magic from a wizard affiliated with the Red Tower of Magic, but he didn't seem to be achieving much progress. Thanks to this, it wasn't just Lovelian's authority as the head wizard that had obviously been affected, but the main family's prestige had also been tarnished. Although the patriarch had just done his best for his eldest son by using his connections to send him to the Red Tower of Magic to learn magic, to others, it appeared as though the patriarch was getting rid of a mediocrely talented heir by exiling him to the Red Tower. Even if the patriarch does shed tears of blood, Madame Ancilla should end up supporting me, Eugene commented. I could see Mother doing that, Cyan mumbled with a needlessly wary glance at the main family's mansion. However, it isn't that my mother dislikes you, Eugene objected, but sometimes when we cross paths, she gets a really fierce look in her eyes. That's because she's seen how you beat me like a dog, argued Cyan. Even if she has, what can I do? How can I just stop beating you when you keep asking for it? You son of a bitch. It was admittedly Cyan who had asked him to take their spars seriously. This was because Cyan had thought that his skills wouldn't grow if Eugene kept taking it easy on him. But for a long time now, Cyan had come to feel deep regret for saying something like that. Eugene showed absolutely no mercy during their spars. If he even saw a tiny opening, he would pierce through it right away and keep attacking mercilessly. While doing so, Eugene would also constantly point out Cyan's various inadequacies. Still, because Eugene explained his criticisms clearly and in a way that was easy to understand, Cyan was forced to listen to him silently, even when he felt like his heart would stop beating out of anger. Eventually, Cyan asked Eugene, "Do you really intend to go to Aroth? If you're going to learn something, you should learn it properly," was all Eugene needed to say in explanation. If you wanted to properly learn magic, the best thing to do would be to go to Aroth. And there's also something that I want to investigate, Eugene thought to himself. He wanted to see what Sienna's life had been like in Aroth following their journey. This desire had been building up within him for a long time. And it wasn't just Sienna, but Annis and Mullen as well. He wanted to know how his companions had lived their lives after they returned from the Devildom 300 years ago, and ultimately, he wanted to know the truth of what had happened then. Even here, at the main estate, there are hardly any records of them. The history of the founding ancestor, Vermouth, was also left very vague. Although he had searched here and there during these 4 years, there were hardly any traces of what the hero and his companions did after returning from the devildom. And this necklace as well. Eugene stared down at the necklace hanging from his neck. He had constantly worn the necklace since he retrieved it from the treasure vault 4 years ago. Even when the head wizard of the Red Tower had personally peered into the memories left within the necklace's mana, Lovelian hadn't been able to find any memories identifying it as Hamel's keepsake. This meant someone else had created an undetectable, false layer in the necklace's memories. From what Eugene thought, the only people who could do something like that were Sienna or Vermouth. But why on earth would they have done it? He couldn't figure out what their reasons for doing so might be. However, if he had to say it, Sienna seemed more likely to have prepared such a prank in the necklace rather than Vermouth. The Vermouth that Eugene remembered wasn't the type of person to do something like this. That's, if you do go to Aroth, Cyan coughed before continuing with a hesitant expression. Seal will be sad. Really, Eugene said, with a laugh for how absurd Cyan's claim sounded. Are we talking about the same Seal, the one who looks disgusted whenever she sees me? Those aren't her true feelings, although he said this. Cyan didn't seem to have any confidence in his own words. Seal Lionheart, that cunning brat, seemed to have started going through puberty at the beginning of this year. She no longer stuck close to Eugene like she used to, and she wouldn't even start a conversation with him. Perhaps it was because the symptoms of her puberty were quite severe. She rarely even left her room. Although Seal didn't neglect her training, she no longer trained with Eugene and Cyan as she had done before. I hate the smell of sweat, was the reason that she had given for it. Thanks to that, Jen and Gilead were forced to keep very busy. They first met with the puberty-stricken Seal in the morning and spent half the day teaching her, while the other half was spent teaching Cyan and Eugene. Anyways, if you do go to Aroth, Seal will be sad, Cyan insisted. Do you really think I'll change my mind just because Seal will be sad? Eugene asked. You heartless bastard, Cyan spat as his fist trembled in anger at Eugene's careless comment. Have you even considered how Mr. Gerhardt will feel? 7. My father will be perfectly fine without me. Even Cyan couldn't help but agree with that. Gerhardt had initially been uncomfortable with living at the main estate, but he had become completely accustomed to life here over the past few years. Now, he regularly went on hunting trips with the heads of the other collateral families, and he sometimes spent whole nights drinking beer with Jen and Gilead. Even Ancilla got along quite well with Gerhardt. Of course, Eugene was well aware of the reason for this. Ancilla didn't wish to show much hostility to Eugene. Although she hadn't relaxed her considerable vigilance towards him, she knew that it was better for both of them if they appeared to get along than to appear openly hostile. However, Tannis, as Eward's mother and the official first wife, was openly wary of Eugene and Gerhardt. Following Eward's failure to become Lovelian's disciple, Tannis' overly sensitive personality had continued to worsen. Looks like I'll need to be a little careful of Tannis, Eugene reminded himself. If she was told that Eugene was going to Aroth, Tannis would definitely become even more sensitive to the threat he posed to her son's candidacy. This wasn't a problem that Eugene could simply solve by paying more attention to her. Instead, this was something that he would have to secretly entrust to the patriarch, Gilead. Where are you going? Cyan asked as he noticed Eugene beginning to walk away. To meet with the patriarch, Eugene explained over his shoulder. You're going to meet with him right now. I need to get his permission quickly. After all, with this final reply, Eugene left the gymnasium. After staring absent-mindedly at Eugene's receding back, Cyan gave a deep sigh. What the hell is with this bullshit about learning magic? Cyan grumbled and began following after Eugene. Although Eugene had set out to find Gilead immediately, he couldn't just barge straight into Gilead's office. While casually exchanging greetings with the main family's servants, Eugene sent through a request to meet with Gilead. Before long, the head butler arrived to personally escort Eugene to Gilead's office. You should really think it over before deciding, Cyan attempted to persuade Eugene. I've already given this matter a lot of thought before coming to my decision, said Eugene. Cyan took a deep breath and swallowed his protests. Now that he thought about it, it was ridiculous that he was trying to hold on to Eugene and prevent him from leaving. If that monster were to turn his hand towards learning magic, wouldn't that mean his training in the martial arts would slow down? That would actually be better for me, Cyan realized. Although Eugene's progress might be ahead of his for the moment, Cyan would also rise to the third star within the next few years. So Cyan decided to see Eugene's departure as more of an opportunity. Of course, Cyan had no intention of being satisfied with just reaching the third star of the White Flame formula. He hoped to have somehow reached the fourth star by the time he became an adult. But can I really? Truthfully speaking, he had his doubts. In the history of the Lionheart clan, there wasn't a single person who had ever managed to reach the fourth star of the White Flame formula while in their teens. Even the family ancestors who had made a name for themselves as geniuses, and even Gilead and Jen, had all been stalled at the third star before they had become adults. In other words, just being able to rise to the third star of the White Flame formula at this age was enough for him to be compared to his genius predecessors. However, such thoughts merely filled Cyan's mouth with a bitter taste. Eugene and Cyan were both currently 17, but today Eugene had already risen to the third star of the White Flame formula. That was an unprecedented speed of advancement. It wasn't like this was the first time that monstrous child had left his mark in the history of the direct line, but Cyan gave a heavy sigh as he turned to stare at Eugene's back. Eugene was currently in the middle of waiting for a reply from the other side of the door before he could enter Gilead's office. I too. Cyan forced himself to swallow another sigh that almost fell from his lips and faced forward once more. It had already been 4 years since Eugene had joined the main family. Since then, Cyan had suffered countless defeats to this absurd brother of his, with whom he didn't even share a single drop of blood. These successive defeats had taught the young Cyan an unquestionable lesson. Despair is nothing but nourishment for further despair. Instead of spending any time in despair, shedding even a single drop of sweat in an effort to improve was far more useful. Tisk. Cyan clicked his tongue as he recalled an unpleasant memory. This wasn't a lesson that Cyan had managed to learn all by himself. When he was still a child, the despair from his inability to defeat Eugene had led Cyan to hide in his room and cower beneath his blankets. However, Eugene had thrown open the door, barged into his room, and kicked Cyan in the ass. Do you really think that I'll just play around while you do shit like this? Even if Cyan was consumed by despair, Eugene would continue to train without taking even a single day off. As such, the difference between them would only continue to grow. After Cyan reminded himself of this lesson, he left Eugene to his own affairs and headed to the gymnasium. What are you doing here so early in the morning? Gilead welcomed Eugene into the room with a bright smile on his face. Instead of getting to the point immediately, Eugene first bowed his head and said, I've come because I have something that I would like to report to you. Report? Gilead asked, tilting his head to the side as his eyes gleamed with curiosity. He was curious about what kind of surprise his adopted son would be bringing him this time. As he sat down on the sofa, Eugene began speaking. Just this morning, I reached the third star of the White Flame formula. At these words, Gilead unconsciously leaped up from his seat. Is that true? He demanded. Yes, sir, it is, admitted Eugene. Gilead rushed over with hurried strides. Meeting his unspoken request, Eugene began resonating the stars circling his heart. As white flames engulfed Eugene's body, Gilead took a deep breath in astonishment before bursting out laughing. Ha! Ha ha ha, too! After taking in Eugene as his adopted son, Gilead had gone through so many different things that he had thought that he could no longer be surprised by anything. However, once again, Gilead couldn't help but be astonished. Was it really possible for him to reach the third star of the White Flame formula at just 17 years of age? Even among all his predecessors, no one had managed the third star at Eugene's young age. As Gilead plopped down on the seat in front of Eugene, he shook his head. Adopting you into the main family might just be the best thing that I have ever done, Gilead admitted. This is all thanks to the patriarch's support, Eugene replied with a faint smile. Although 4 years had passed since he'd been adopted, Eugene had yet to call Gilead father. The only one he called father was his biological parent, Gerhardt. Gilead didn't feel any unpleasantness due to this. Instead, he approved of Eugene's filial piety to his biological father and was proud of how considerate his adopted son was. But if only such an impressive child was truly his son, then no one would raise any objections to Eugene becoming the next patriarch. On the contrary, everyone would actually be united under the opinion that Eugene should become the patriarch. I shouldn't have such thoughts, Gilead attempted to discard this dangerous idea with a shake of his head. Such careless thoughts would lead to bloodshed and death. For the clan, and of course his family as well, Gilead didn't want to force his children to have to bear their knives at each other. After he finished casting off such thoughts, Gilead continued. My support, you say? I don't believe that I gave you anything too impressive. So this achievement is all the result of your hard work. But it was all thanks to the patriarch's support that I was able to work so hard, Eugene argued. After carefully examining Eugene's smiling face, Gilead burst out laughing. It looks like there's something you need, he observed. Without any hesitation, Eugene confessed, I want to learn magic. In the past, he had had to pay attention to maintaining his childish facade while speaking to Gilead, but now there was no longer any need for that. Eugene had grown up quite a bit, and Gilead had gotten used to Eugene's forthrightness over the past 4 years. Magic? Gilead asked. Despite all this, Gilead wouldn't find it so easy to grant Eugene's current desire as he would any other request. The confusion that Gilead initially felt was the same as Cyan's. Why did Eugene suddenly want to learn magic? After all, Eugene had never once expressed any desire to learn magic during these past 4 years. Are you serious when you say this? Asked Gilead. Yes, sir, Eugene confirmed. But why? No one from our family's entire line was able to reach the 3rd star of the White Flame formula at your age. If you continue to work as hard as you have been, you might be able to rise to the 4th star before you become an adult. I'll still be able to train hard, even while I'm learning magic, Eugene stated without any uncertainty. Although this might seem arrogant, in Eugene's opinion, someone like him had the right to say such a thing. Sir Patriarch, in the 4 years since I was adopted into the main family, I have never once left your care, Eugene said as he straightened his back and faced Gilead firmly. Today, as I was advancing to the 3rd star, I realized something. If I continue to stay at the main estate and keep practicing as I have been, I don't believe that I will continue to show the same amount of growth. Gilead hummed in consideration. I am extremely lacking in real-life experience, Eugene concluded. Although Eugene's voice was calm as he said this, Gilead felt a surging vitality coming from these words that matched Eugene's young age. Eugene's voice was full of his sincerity and desire for growth. Eugene confidently continued his argument. I want to learn much more, especially about magic. While it is something that I have never studied before, I know that it is also a discipline that uses mana. Although I don't yet know if I have any great talent for magic, I believe that by venturing into magic, I'll be able to view mana from a different perspective than the one I've had until now. Gilead stayed silent. Even if I don't make much progress in it, just by learning a new discipline, I believe that it will still be a great experience for me. I am sure that all of this won't be in vain. That is why I have dared to make such a request. Eugene stopped talking at this point and stared at Gilead with sparkling eyes. Then he placed his hands on his knees and bowed his head low. I sincerely beseech you. Then, as he shook his head from side to side, he continued speaking. Raise your head. Do you really think that there is any need for you to bow your head just for a small request like this? Yes, Patriarch 7. Even if I am your patriarch, how can I pour cold water on your burning desire to learn and grow? Eugene, I understand what you're trying to say. So if you really want to learn magic, then I'll just have to give you my permission to learn. Eugene shook his bowed head in relief and smiled. Of course, when he raised his head, there was no trace of amusement left on his face. So then, how exactly do you want to go about learning magic? Gilead asked. Eugene trailed off. Since you've already come to ask for my permission, you must have thought it through already. No. I want to go to Aeroth. Although Gilead had expected this, he couldn't hide his uneasy reaction when Eugene mentioned the magic kingdom of Aeroth. If you wanted to learn magic, then Aeroth was definitely the best place to go. And if it wasn't for what his eldest son, Eward, had experienced in Aeroth, Gilead wouldn't have felt any discomfort from these words. Aroth, you say? Gilead murmured. I don't need anything else. Just your permission, Eugene continued, speaking quickly. From here on, Eugene knew that he needed to be careful with his words. Eward was Gilead's soft spot. Even though he was the eldest son, Eward hadn't made any outstanding achievements in the martial arts. And despite showing interest in magic ever since he was young, the eldest son had failed to show much progress in magic as well. Although he had stayed in Aroth ever since he was sent there 4 years ago, Eward hadn't been able to escape the heavy weight of the Lionheart clan's prestigious name, and instead had been made into a laughingstock for having only managed to enter the tower through his connections. Eugene didn't want to get involved with Eward. He only wanted to go to Aroth to learn magic and follow any clues left behind by Sienna. However, if the word Aroth was spoken anywhere in the main estate, whoever heard it instantly thought of Eward. So he needed to be very careful, as Eugene didn't want to create any pointless misunderstandings. Gilead eventually shook off his unease and said, If that's what you want, then I can only give you permission to go there. Allow me to inform Lovelian first. Although I'm grateful for your thoughts, I don't want to receive too much in terms of support. Eugene paused for a moment to examine Gilead's expression before continuing. To be honest, it feels like any assistance would be very burdensome, and Master Lovelian should be quite busy as well. If possible, I would like to try studying quietly on my own without any assistance from Master Lovelian. That would actually be quite difficult, Gilead said, unable to stop a wry smile forming on his face. Even if you leave the main estate, you are still a member of the Lionheart clan. The moment you arrive in Aroth, many of Aroth's wizards will be paying attention to you. Even if you refuse it, a lot of people will approach you to make connections to the Lionheart clan. Then I just won't accept their offers, Eugene said determinedly. Your convictions are praiseworthy, Gilead complimented with a sigh. How good would it be if his eldest son could be like that? As dangerous thoughts rose up in his head once more, Gilead shook his head to clear it. Eugene, just promise me one thing, Gilead requested. What is it? Eugene asked. Do not get involved with black magic. In Aroth, there was a black tower of magic where black wizards gathered. There weren't any disturbing rumors that matched their sinister reputation, and unlike in the distant past, the public opinion of them wasn't too bad. However, the Lionheart clan had been founded by the Great Vermouth. Although some of the collateral branches had chosen to specialize in magic, black magic was still forbidden to the clan as an unwritten rule. I also despise black magic, Eugene replied without any hesitation. Gilead nodded in relief and said, As long as you can promise me that, I won't lift a finger, so you'll be free to leave for Aroth in whichever way you desire. I won't even inform Lovelian. I hope you won't have to personally experience the same sorts of troubles that Eward did. Is there anything else you would like to request? I would like to shamelessly ask for an allowance. How long do you plan on staying in Aroth? I'll need to go there first and start studying to get a rough idea of how long it will take me, but I don't think I'll be returning before becoming an adult. That means you intend on staying for at least a few years. Well, that's the only way I'll be able to actually learn something, Eugene confirmed with a laugh. That certainly seems true. However, since magic is a completely different discipline from what you've been taught so far, it will be impossible for you to make any progress if you go into this half-heartedly, Gilead warned Eugene. He had never learned any magic in his past life. As such, even Eugene didn't have the confidence to say that he would be able to make rapid progress. Finishing his conversation with Gilead, Eugene left the room. As he walked back down the hallway, he heard a knocking sound coming from a tightly locked door. What is it? Eugene asked without any alarm as he halted in his steps. He knew whose room that was. It was one of the rooms Seal was using. Ever since she had started going through a rough patch of puberty a few months ago, she had stopped going to the gym and instead used some of the rooms in the mansion for her own training. Are you really going to Aroth? Seal didn't open the door fully and instead let her voice leak from a crack in the doorway. Did Cyan tell you that? Eugene asked. He also told me that you've reached the 3rd star of the White Flame formula. So you've already heard everything then. I asked if you're really going to Aroth. Yep, I've even got permission from the Patriarch. Why are you even going? As she said this, Seal knocked on the door once more. Knock, knock. Eugene smiled and responded with a few knocks of his own. Because I want to learn magic, he explained. If that's the case, you don't really need to go to Aeroth. You can just invite a wizard from the capital to be your teacher, argued Seal. Don't you know that they won't be as good as the wizards of Aeroth? If you request it, Father would even summon a wizard from the royal court. But I don't believe that a court wizard would be better at teaching than a wizard from one of Aeroth's towers of magic. The court wizards are guaranteed to be skillful. What I want isn't a skillful wizard, but a wizard who is good at teaching, Eugene patiently explained. Do you really need to learn magic? Seal asked, her voice growing petulant. She opened the door slightly and let her head poke out of the room. At 17 years old, Seal was left with very little of her past mischievous look, but the change was only skin deep. Eugene was well aware of just how cunning this girl's true personality could be. Seal once again insisted, You don't really need to learn magic, right? But there's also nothing wrong with learning magic, is there? Eugene argued back. If it's magic you want, then isn't your spirit magic enough? Also, while you aren't here, brother and I might be able to catch up to your skill level. Seal was blatantly provoking him, but Eugene just snickered in amusement. If that happens, that's actually good for me, Eugene smirked. What's so good about it? Won't that just mean that the main family is growing stronger, and that it will be more fun sparring with you too? Although it has been quite a while since I sparred with you. If I start sparring with you from now on, will you stay here instead of going to Aeroth?
No, I will still be going.
Bastard, Seal insulted him with a pout on her face before pulling her head back into her room. Until just now, Seal had been immersed in her training, so her hair was frizzy and her body was damp with sweat. She didn't want to show such an appearance to anyone, nor did she want anyone to notice her body odor. After a short silence, Seal continued speaking. How long will you be gone? Won't know until I get there, answered Eugene casually. You should know roughly how long it will take. It will be a year at the very least. Why do you want to stay for so long? Moving out will be a pain, and what will you do about Mr. Gerhardt? It might be because they were twins, but Seal had ended up saying the same thing as Cyan. My father will be just fine without me, Eugene pointed out. Uncle Jin will be lonely, Seal eventually said after some hesitation. That might be true. Eugene also happened to enjoy his frequent spars with Jin. To make up for me not being here, you both should make sure to play with him, teased Eugene. And what about my brother? Seal suddenly brought up Cyan. Why bring up Cyan here? What I mean is that my brother enjoys sparring with you as well. If he really does enjoy getting beaten up by me, your brother has to be a little strange in the head. In any case, brother will be lonely if you're not around. Earlier, while he was talking to me, he even secretly confessed that he didn't want you to go. But I plan on going anyway. I would also prefer it if you didn't go. Like I said, I'm still going. You son of a bitch. Behind the door, Seal's face twisted into a frown. In the main family, Eugene was the only one who would allow Seal's words to wash over him without any reaction. Seal popped her head out just to glare at him before slamming the door shut with a loud bang. When are you leaving? Seal's muffled voice came through the door. Eugene answered, Tomorrow. Why are you leaving so quickly? Is there any reason for me to delay it? Since I've received Gilead's permission, I should just save time and head off right away. Rude jerk, shouldn't we at least have a farewell party? Why would you want to throw a farewell party for a jerk? Knocking on the door again as a goodbye, Eugene resumed walking down the corridor. Only after Eugene had gotten some distance away did Seal open the door once more. Are you really leaving tomorrow? As this voice came from behind him, Eugene just waved his hand as a response without turning back to look at Seal. Since he had obtained Gilead's approval, Eugene showed no hesitation in his subsequent actions. After returning to the annex, he knocked on Gerhardt's door. Come back safely. Although he had been suddenly informed that Eugene would be leaving for Aeroth tomorrow, Gerhardt didn't spend much time thinking about it before giving his blessing. It wasn't like he didn't have any concerns for his son, but Gerhardt also didn't want to suppress his son's freedom after Eugene had already grown so splendidly. Gilead lectured his son. While you're there, don't hang around with naughty kids and make sure not to neglect your lessons. Eugene returned the favor. Even when I'm not here, don't do anything you shouldn't do, father, and don't neglect your exercise either. Gerhardt burst into laughter at this rejoinder. Gerhardt had greatly improved himself during his past 4 years at the Maine estate. He had lost a lot of weight and even gained quite a bit of muscle. It was all thanks to his regular hunting trips with the collateral patriarchs and frequent walks he enjoyed in the Maine family's extensive forest. Also, if anyone tries to cause you trouble because I'm not here, write to me right away. Don't pointlessly suffer in silence on your own, Eugene insisted. Gerhardt tried to reassure his son. I'm sure that the patriarch will be able to spare the attention if I bring the matter to him. Still, wouldn't you feel better if it was your one and only son who was looking out for you instead of the busy patriarch? Gerhardt smiled silently and patted Eugene on the shoulder. This gifted son of his was Gerhardt's pride and treasure. If it wasn't for his son. Gerhardt nodded his head as he recalled his memories of Gidal, where they had been living just a few years ago. Gerhardt tried to soothe Eugene's protectiveness. I just don't want to be a hindrance to you. What hindrance? Don't say things like that anymore. I have never once thought of you as a hindrance, Eugene responded bluntly while poking Gerhardt in the side. In any case, I'll be leaving tomorrow. I'll make sure to stay healthy while I'm gone, so you should also make sure to stay safe. Father, got that? Fine, fine. I've got it. Eugene was now taller than Gerhardt. Gerhardt smiled happily while looking up at his son, who had grown so mature. That night, Eugene and Gerhardt, as well as all the members of the Maine family, gathered together and sat around a large table. Even Seal, who hadn't shown her face at dinner in quite some time, was now sitting at the table wearing a nice dress. Although it wasn't a lavish farewell party, they had at least managed to wrangle something into place so that the whole family could offer Eugene blessings for the future as he prepared to leave them for a few years. Various well wishes were exchanged over a table laden with an array of luxurious dishes. So you intend to learn magic in Aeroth, really? Since you have such an amazing talent in martial arts, I'm sure you will be good at learning magic as well, Ancilla praised Eugene. The news of Eugene rising to the third star of the White Flame formula had made Ancilla chew on her lip in frustration. But the fact that that monstrous child was leaving the Maine estate for the time being was a joyous consolation. I really envy Sir Gerhardt for having such a wonderful son, flattered Ancilla. Ha ha, you're too kind. Gerhardt accepted the compliment with a laugh. During these 4 years, Ancilla's attitude hadn't seen much change from when they had first met. She had no intention of forging a hostile relationship with Gerhardt, let alone Eugene. Instead, she held out a hand with a smile, thus creating a friendly relationship with Gerhardt and Eugene. But Tannis, the first wife, showed the two a completely different attitude. The dark circles under Tannis's eyes and her sallow cheeks left a rather desolate impression. For the past few years, Tannis had rarely left the Maine family's mansion, and she spent her days reacting with great agitation to even the slightest mistakes from the servants. Tannis felt that she had no choice but to do so, and she felt like she was being driven further into a corner with each passing day. Ewart had not been able to become Lovelian's disciple as she had hoped, nor did he manage to forge any connections with Aeroth's high-ranking wizards. Since even Guilford and his wife, who had been friendly with Tannis, had left the Maine estate a few years ago, Tannis had no allies in the current Maine estate. Although it's her fault for being so prickly, avoiding Tannis's intense gaze, Eugene focused on cutting his meat. Gilead had never discriminated against Tannis. He didn't even force Ewart to return despite all the negative rumors. Instead, Gilead kept providing support to shore up Ewart's insufficiencies. It was Tannis's own decision to spend her days shunning any contact and clawing at her surroundings. Just as the meal was ending, Tannis suddenly called out, "Eugene!" Although Ancilla treated Eugene warmly whenever they met, this was the first time the temperamental first wife had called Eugene by his name all year. Though it wasn't like they had even held frequent conversations in the previous years. Tannis requested, "Once you get to Aeroth, please take care of your older brother, Ewart." Eugene was unable to respond to these words that had suddenly been thrown at him and could only blink in surprise. Tannis continued, "He must have been lonely, staying in Aeroth all by himself for the past few years. I know that he didn't get to spend much time with you as siblings, but Ewart is still your brother. Yes, ma'am, Eugene eventually replied. You might be adopted, but Ewart is your brother. So, please treat him like a younger brother should. Even as she said this, Tanis's eyes slid to the side. She continued speaking while glaring at Cyan and Seal, who were sitting close to Eugene. Take care of your older brother. You can at least do that, right? I'll one do my best, Eugene avoided promising. Oh my, you're being too insistent, big sister. I'm sure that Eugene will do what he can, and Scylla gave a polite laugh as she drew Tanis's gaze away from Cyan and Seal with these words. Tanis glared at Ancilla with her narrowed eyes, then pushed her chair back and stood up. Please excuse me. I'm feeling exhausted. I'll be leaving now to go and get some rest. You may be excused. Gilead nodded in permission with a perplexed look on his face. Over the past few years, Eugene had gotten quite close to Gilead. Thanks to this, he was able to make a fully informed decision about Gilead's position. Sure enough, the Patriarch's seat is a shit place to be stuck on. Eugene never wanted to become the Patriarch.